The first time I saw her, she was kneeling in the mud outside our forward operating base on Velthari Prime, holding a child's boot. Just one boot, pale green synthetic leather, child-sized maybe for a 6-year-old. She held it the way you hold something that used to be attached to a person you loved, and she wasn't crying. She was past crying. Her silver eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a vertical line down the center of her face in the Moonfang tradition, were dry and absolutely still, the way water goes still before it freezes. I'd been on Velthari Prime for 11 months. I knew what frozen grief looked like. I'd seen it in the faces of the refugee columns that moved through our base every week, the Velthari pack clans displaced by the Reclamation Fleet's campaign to restructure the planet's governance. The fleet called it administrative reorganization. The Velthari called it what it was: systematic destruction of every clan seat, every pack bond anchor, every child-rearing commune that held their society together. I was there as a xenobiological field consultant attached to a Terran Neutral Observer Corps team. We weren't soldiers. We weren't authorized to intervene. We were there to document, to verify, to produce reports that would be filed with the Interstellar Arbitration Council and read by people in comfortable offices approximately 200 light-years from where any of it was happening. I hated my job some days. I crouched beside her, not because protocol said to, because a woman kneeling in mud holding a child's boot is a specific kind of emergency that no protocol covers, and ignoring it makes you something you don't want to become. Is it his? I asked. My Velthari was functional, not fluent, but functional, enough to have a real conversation if both parties were patient. She looked at me. The 3 silver eyes tracked at slightly different speeds, a Moonfang biological quirk I'd read about but never actually encountered. The Moonfang subclan had been considered extinct for 6 years. The fleet's first campaign on Velthari Prime had supposedly wiped them out entirely. Yes, she said, he was wearing it when they took him. I sat down in the mud next to her. My field uniform was already ruined from 3 days of rain. Mud didn't matter. When? I asked. 4 days ago. She turned the boot over in her hands. They came to the commune at dawn. I was in the outer woods running a perimeter check. It is my duty. I am the eldest. I protect the younger ones. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I was in the woods. I heard the ships. By the time I reached the commune, they had everyone, children, elders, the nursing mothers and their infants. They took everyone except you. I hid. The way she said it, flat, stripped of everything, told me she hadn't decided yet whether that was survival or cowardice. I was in the canopy. I pressed myself against a branch and I watched them load my people into containment transports. She paused. I watched them load my brother into a containment transport. He is 9 years old. He kept looking for me. He was calling my name. She didn't say anything else for a moment. He was still calling my name when the hatch closed. I had no answer for that. Sometimes there isn't one. What is your name? I asked. She looked at me again. There was something assessing in those silver eyes now, alongside the grief, calculating but not coldly. The way someone looks at you when they're deciding whether to trust you with something important. Sail, she said. Sail Moonfang, last surviving heir of the Moonfang pack seat. I was quiet for a second. The Moonfang pack seat was the oldest continuous ruling lineage on Velthari Prime. 600 years of unbroken succession. The fleet had reportedly wiped them out specifically because their pack seat gave them legal standing to challenge the Reclamation Charter in Arbitration Council, the only clan bloodline on the planet with the documentation and lineage records to do it. If Sail was alive, that legal standing still existed. If her brother was alive, and she could prove it, the Arbitration Council would be required to hold proceedings before the fleet could complete their restructuring campaign. Kale Marin, I said, Terran Neutral Observer Corps, xenobiological consultant. She looked at me steadily. You document things. Yes. That is what your people do here. You document, you watch, you produce reports. Yes. And then what happens to the reports? I thought about the stack of filed reports on my supervisor's desk. I thought about the response times from the arbitration council. I thought about the phrase, administrative processing backlog. Honestly, I said, most of the time not much. She nodded slowly. Like that was the answer she'd expected, and she'd asked the question not because she hoped for better, but because she needed to know exactly who she was dealing with. Then I don't need a documenter, she said. She stood up, still holding the boot. I need someone who knows how the fleet's containment system works, where they take prisoners, how their ships are tracked, how a person might find a 9-year-old boy in a containment grid designed to hold 10,000. She looked down at me. Can you be that person, Kale Marin, or can you only be the other kind? I want to be clear about something. I knew exactly what I was agreeing to. The Neutral Observer Corps had very clear regulations about personnel involvement in active conflict zones. Involvement was defined broadly and included, specifically, assisting any party to a territorial dispute in locating or extracting detained individuals. Doing what Sale was asking me to do would end my career, void my contract, and potentially expose me to prosecution under the Interstellar Conduct Accords. I knew all of that. I also knew that a 9-year-old boy had been calling his sister's name as a hatch closed over him, and that the fleet's containment processing for administrative detainees had a documented mortality rate of 11% in the first 30 days, primarily from overcrowding and inadequate medical support. 11% in 30 days. I had 26 days before that statistic became relevant to Sale's brother. I need access to my equipment, I said. And I need you to tell me everything you know about the transport that took them. Her name was Sale, and she was not what I'd expected. I'd read about the Moonfang bloodline in academic papers, the triple-I adaptation, the enhanced low-light vision, the subcutaneous bioresonance capability that their clan had developed over centuries of living in Velthari's dense northern forests. They were described in the literature as reclusive, ceremonial, deeply tradition-bound. The kind of people who kept meticulous genealogical records and held 9-day mourning ceremonies, and governed by consensus of the full Packseat Council. The Sale walking beside me through the secondary forest south of our base was all of that, and also completely something else. She moved like someone who had been running perimeter checks since she was old enough to walk. Silent, efficient, always slightly ahead of me and always slightly turned, so she could see both the path forward and the direction we'd come from. She'd stripped her outer robe, ceremonial silver white, the Moonfang mourning color, and tucked it into a waterproof pack. Underneath, she wore the practical layered gear of a field-rated Velthari ranger. She'd been surviving alone in the forest for 4 days. She'd scouted the fleet's forward processing depot without being detected. She'd identified the transport serial numbers of the ships that had taken her people. She had not been waiting for rescue. She had been waiting for a tool she didn't have yet. I was apparently the tool. The depot is 17 kilometers northeast, she said, not slowing down. They're using it as a transit hub. Transports come in, process the detainees, sort them, then redistribute to secondary holding sites. The redistribution ships leave every 48 hours. How do you know the redistribution schedule? I watched for 4 days. From where? The canopy, she glanced at me. I told you I hide well. The redistribution sites, do you know where they are? 3 of them. The fleet uses a tiered system. Primary holding for adults of working age, secondary holding for elders and nursing mothers, tertiary for unaccompanied children. The way she said tertiary for unaccompanied children was completely steady. I noted that and filed it away. She was holding herself together through pure functional precision. Every piece of information she'd gathered in 4 days alone in the forest was weight she was carrying instead of grief, and she was carrying it very carefully. "Your brother," I said, "Dale." "Dale?" She said his name like it was the only solid thing in the sentence. "He is 9. He has one eye arrangement like mine and two like our father's line, the lateral pair. He runs fast. He is better at climbing than I am, which he is very proud of." A pause. "He talks too much when he is nervous. He will be talking constantly right now." She said that last part quietly. "That's good," I said. "Kids who talk in those situations are the ones who are coping." She looked at me. "You know this from experience." 11 months on Velthari Prime, I said. "I've worked with a lot of displaced children." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the path. "Then you understand," she said, "why I cannot wait for arbitration council proceedings." "I understand." "And you understand why I cannot pretend that the throne, the pack seat succession, the lineage charter, all of it, why I cannot pretend any of that matters more than finding him." "I understand that too." She nodded once, like that settled something. "Good, then we are agreed on what matters." What I had that she didn't: fleet system access. As a neutral observer corps consultant, I had read-only access to the fleet's administrative data feeds. It was meant to allow us to verify claims, cross-reference incident reports, confirm the accuracy of the fleet's own documentation. The fleet had agreed to it as part of their cooperation with the Arbitration Council's monitoring requirements. They'd agreed to it because they assumed neutral observers would only ever use it to read documents they'd already filed. They hadn't considered the possibility of a neutral observer who also happened to have a functional background in xenobiological tracking systems, and had spent 3 years before joining the Corps working logistics analysis for a Terran resettlement agency. Work that had given me a very specific skill set around finding people in bureaucratic systems that didn't want them to be found. We set up in an abandoned ranger outpost 3 kilometers from the depot. Sale had found it on her second day alone and restocked it with supplies she'd sourced from somewhere she didn't explain. She was very good at not explaining things that didn't require explanation. I opened my field terminal and pulled up the fleet administrative feed. The detainee processing system was, from a bureaucratic standpoint, actually quite organized, which made it navigable. "They log by biometric intake," I said, scanning the data structure. "Every detainee gets processed through a bioscan at the depot. It's for their own record keeping, so they can track who they have. That means Dale is in here somewhere." "He would have been logged 4 days ago," Sale said, leaning over my shoulder. Her presence was very still at the initial intake. "Do you have any of his biological markers in your clan records? Anything documented?" She reached into her pack and produced a small data chip. "The Moonfang lineage records, every member of the pack seat for 6 generations, full biological documentation." Of course she had it. She was the heir. She'd probably grabbed it before she ran. I loaded the chip, cross-referenced Dale's documented markers against the depot's intake logs. It took 40 seconds. "He's here," I said. "He was processed yesterday evening. Tertiary classification, unaccompanied minor, pending redistribution." Sale's hand closed on my shoulder briefly, one sharp grip, then she let go. "When does the redistribution ship leave?" I checked the schedule. 17 hours. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then we have 17 hours, she said. "Here is what I want to say about the plan we made. It was not a good plan. I want to be honest about that. It was a plan constructed from available materials under severe time constraint, which is another way of saying it was the best bad option in a set of bad options. Sale knew that. I knew that. We both proceeded anyway, because the alternative was watching a redistribution ship leave with a 9-year-old boy on it, and then spending the next 6 months trying to find him through official channels, while the fleet's containment mortality statistics continued to apply. The depot was not heavily guarded. That was, in a perverse way, the fleet's own statement about what they thought of the people inside it. They weren't considered threats. They were considered administrative matter, so the security was administrative grade. Gate scanners, perimeter motion sensors, a rotation of 8 security personnel per shift, most of whom spent their time at the central monitoring station rather than walking the grounds. What the depot did have was a biometric lock system on every holding bay. What I had was fleet administrative access that included, technically, the maintenance override protocols for those locks, because the maintenance contractors who'd negotiated the system installation had required administrator access for the core monitoring agreement, and no one had thought to exclude biometric lock overrides from that access. "You can open the bays," Sale said when I explained this. "From inside the perimeter," I said. "The override requires a direct connection to the depot's local network. I need to be physically present to use it." She considered this, "So we both go in." "I go in," I said, "officially, as a neutral observer corps consultant conducting a documentation review. I have standing to do that. It's within my charter. I can request access to the processing records, which gets me through the front gate." "And me?" "You're better at the canopy approach." She looked at me steadily. Then, to my considerable surprise, the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something that might become one under different circumstances. "I have been told this before," she said. The depot commander was a fleet administrative officer named Grevin, which is a name I will not forget. He was not a cruel man. That was the strangest thing about him. He was efficient, paperwork-oriented, mildly irritated by my request for a documentation review, but professionally accommodating of it because the Corps had legal standing, and he wasn't going to create an incident over it. He gave me a visitor access badge and a security escort, and showed me to the records center with the kind of brisk neutrality of a man who had convinced himself that what he was administering was simply a process. I've thought about Grevin many times since, about how systems find the people they need, how the worst things that happen to populations are usually administered by people who think of themselves as doing paperwork. My escort was a young security officer who'd been assigned to stand by the door of the records center and was clearly bored. I spent 40 minutes actually reviewing records, legitimate review, the kind I'd do in any documentation visit, while running the override protocol from my terminal through the depot's local network connection. The biometric locks on the tertiary holding bays were, from the system's perspective, undergoing routine maintenance testing. All I had to do was send the signal. I sent it at exactly the moment I'd agreed with Sale, timed to the shift rotation, when the security personnel were moving between posts and the monitoring station would have a 90-second attention gap. I kept my face completely neutral. In the forest outside, 3 kilometers of perimeter between her and the holding bays, Sale moved. What happened in the next 40 minutes, I know mostly from what she told me afterward. She came in through the northeast corner, above the motion sensor sweep, exactly as we'd planned. The sensors were calibrated for ground movement. The fleet hadn't anticipated anyone approaching from the canopy. The Moonfang bioresonance capability, which I'd read about in academic papers, apparently had a secondary function I hadn't seen documented. At close range, it could suppress the bioelectric signature that most motion sensors used as their secondary detection layer. She'd known that. She hadn't mentioned it until I'd asked how she planned to handle the sensors. "My family has been evading detection systems for 3 centuries, she'd said, with a matter-of-factness that had stopped my breath for a second. The tertiary holding bays were in the depot's eastern block. When the maintenance override unlocked the bay doors, Sale was already in position. What she found in the tertiary bays: 63 children, ranging from infants to adolescents, from 7 different displaced Pac clans, all unaccompanied, all logged for redistribution on the ship leaving in 16 hours. What Sale did with that information: she got Dale first. This is what she told me. She moved through the bay until she found him in the third holding section, sitting against the wall with his knees pulled up, talking quietly to a younger child beside him, a girl of maybe 5 who was clearly frightened, and to whom Dale appeared to be narrating an elaborate story involving a hero with 3 swords and a very fast horse. He looked up when Sale came in. He said her name. She said his. They had approximately 4 seconds of reunion in a fleet containment bay, which is not enough time, but is also exactly as much time as was available. Then she said, "Can you run?" He said, "I have been waiting for you to ask me that." Then she said, "There are 62 other children here." He looked at her. He was 9 years old. He understood immediately what that meant. "Then we helped them first," he said. She told me this later, and I could not speak for a moment. "He is 9, she said, and her voice was not steady when she said it. He said it like it was obvious. They moved 63 children through the northeast perimeter in 31 minutes. I don't know exactly how. I was still in the records center, reviewing documentation with scrupulous professional attention while trying not to let my heartbeat show on my face. What I know is that when the shift rotation completed and the security personnel returned to their posts, the tertiary holding bays were empty, and the motion sensor logs showed nothing. 31 minutes, 63 children, through a fleet security perimeter. When I review the logistics of it now, I still don't fully understand how she did it. The Moonfang bioresonance explanation covers some of it. The canopy approach covers some of it. I think the rest of it is that she was the Moonfang heir. That 600 years of protecting people had been distilled into her through training and bloodline, and the specific discipline of someone who has spent her whole life knowing that the people in her care are her first responsibility. She had come for her brother. She had found 63 children. She had taken all of them. I left the depot with my documentation review completed, my visitor badge returned, and my professional demeanor fully intact. My escort, the bored young security officer, walked me to the gate and said to have a good evening. I said I would try. I walked 11 minutes down the road toward our base before I turned into the tree line. Sale was waiting. She was standing in a clearing with 63 children arranged around her, some sitting, some standing, the older ones automatically moving to the perimeter with the instinctive protective spacing that Velthari pack behavior produced in juveniles who'd been through threat events. They were quiet, remarkably, implausibly quiet, for 63 frightened children in a forest at night. Standing next to Sale, holding her hand with both of his, was a boy with 1 vertical eye arrangement and 2 lateral ones, dark silver in the moonlight, watching me approach with the specific assessment gaze of a child who has decided to evaluate strangers thoroughly before trusting them. "Dale," Sale said, "this is Cale Marin." Dale looked at me for a long moment. "You helped get the doors open," he said. "Yes." "And you're the one who found me in the system." "Yes." He nodded, with the gravity of someone triple his age. "Thank you," he said. "My sister said you didn't have to, that you could have gotten in trouble." She was right on both counts. He considered this. "Why did you do it then?" I looked at him. I looked at the 62 children around the clearing, quiet and watchful in the dark. "Because you were calling your sister's name," I said, "and she could hear you." He thought about that for a second. Then he said, "That is a good reason." Getting 63 children to safety was, logistically, a considerably larger problem than getting 2 people to safety. The Velthari refugee network, The informal system of safe houses and relay points that displaced pack clans had built over the 2 years of the fleet campaign was not designed to move children in groups of 60. It was designed for small family units, moving fast, using Velthari pack clan kinship networks to pass people from safe house to safe house. What we had was a non-Velthari consultant with compromised official standing, and an extinct line heiress with 3 eyes and 6 centuries of pack seat authority backing her name. What we needed was the network. "I know someone," Sale said, when I explained the problem. "From the Resistance Network. From my mother's lineage, a cousin. She runs a relay point 40 kilometers south, Pack Clan Verash, which has not been targeted yet." She paused. "She will help. The Moonfang pack seat has mutual obligation bonds with Verash going back 4 generations. Will she trust a contact from you, given that everyone thinks the Moonfang line is extinct?" Sale looked at me with an expression that was, I realized, faintly amused. "What is the first thing every Velthari child learns about the Moonfang line?" she asked. I thought back to the academic papers, that your clan never breaks a bond. "And the second thing?" I thought harder, "that you don't stay dead." She smiled, actually smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "We have a phrase for it," she said. "It translates approximately as, the Moonfang have a history of inconveniencing their enemies by surviving." I spent the next 36 hours doing things that would have ended my career several times over if anyone had been watching closely. I used my administrative access to file false documentation in the fleet's detainee records, reclassifying the 63 children as transferred to humanitarian processing, via a documentation pathway that existed precisely because the fleet had agreed to honor Arbitration Council humanitarian review requests, and which I used to create paper trails showing the children had been moved to a third-party humanitarian organization's care. It wasn't legal. It was also the kind of thing that, if it ever came up in an Arbitration Council proceeding, would look exactly like what it was: a neutral observer corps consultant using his access to protect children from a containment system with an 11% mortality rate. I'd thought about that in the records center while I was sending the override signal. I'd decided I could live with the version of myself who did it. I wasn't as sure I could live with the other version. Sale's cousin, Rel Verash, a compact, efficient woman who arrived at our forest camp 4 hours after Sale's contact and looked at 63 children with the expression of someone doing rapid shelter calculations, was extraordinary. She had the relay network moving within 6 hours. Children began moving south in small groups, clan-sorted where possible. Relay passed through 6 safe houses to the Verash compound 40 kilometers away. Dale stayed with Sale. I watched them together, in the hours of waiting between relay movements. He sat beside her and talked, constantly, as she'd said. He narrated everything, the story he'd been telling the small girl in the holding bay, an elaborate saga about a 3-sworded hero that had apparently been running for 2 days, which he resumed with Sale as his audience. He told her about the other children in the bay, which ones were scared, and which ones were trying not to show it, which ones had needed the story most. He told her about the guard who'd brought water twice a day and hadn't been unkind. He told her about the window in the bay that showed the sky, and how he'd watched for the particular cloud formation that meant rain was coming, because he'd learned that from her, and it had made him feel like she was there. Sale sat beside him and listened. She didn't stop touching him, hand on his shoulder, hand on his back, hand briefly on his head. Small, constant reassurances. The pack bond physical language of Velthari clan contact. I turned away at some point because it was private, what I was watching. Grief resolving into something else. 2 people finding their way back to each other through a conversation about a 3-sworded hero and cloud formations and the particular shape of a window. On the 3rd day, Rel Verash came to me with a question. The girl, she said, Sale. You know who she is. Yes. The council will want to know she's alive. The Moonfang lineage documentation she carries, if it's real, and it is real, I have seen her family's records. It changes the legal standing of the entire reclamation charter. The fleet's campaign has no legitimate basis if there is a surviving pack seat heir who can challenge it. I know. Have you told anyone in your corps? I thought about my supervisor's desk. I thought about the processing backlog. I thought about 11 months of filed reports. Not yet, I said. Why? I looked at Sale across the camp, sitting with Dale, watching him sleep in the afternoon light. Because she just got her brother back, I said, and she has 63 children to see to safety. The council can wait 3 days. Relverash looked at me for a moment. You are not what I expected from a Terran Observer Corps consultant, she said. No, I said, I've heard that before. On the 4th day, Sale came to me. Dale was asleep in the Ranger outpost, surrounded by the remaining children who hadn't yet been relayed south. Relverash was managing the logistics of the final relay movement. The forest was quiet in the late afternoon, the specific gray-gold quiet of Velthari Prime before the evening rains came. Sale sat down beside me, not across from me. Beside me, which in Velthari Pack's social custom meant something specific, equal ground, common concern, no hierarchy between the parties. Rel told me what you said, she said, about the council waiting. It's true. They can wait. Eventually they cannot, she looked at the trees. Eventually I have to become what I am by birth, the heir, the last of the lineage, the legal standing for a challenge to the reclamation charter. She paused. There will be proceedings, documentation, testimony, political machinery that moves very slowly while the fleet continues its operations. Yes. I have been thinking about what that will cost. She was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about the throne, the pack seat, since I was old enough to understand what I was inheriting. All my life I was taught that the pack seat was the most important thing, that the lineage was the most important thing, that my responsibility to my people as heir superseded everything else. She looked at her hands. When they took Dale, she said, I did not think about the pack seat. I did not think about the lineage or the charter or the legal standing. I thought about a 9-year-old boy calling my name. She paused. I thought about the fact that there is no version of the world in which my throne means more than my brother. No, I said, there isn't. My mother would have said the lineage must continue above all. My tutors would have said the pack seat responsibility outweighs personal bonds. What do you say? She looked at me. I say that a seat of power which requires you to abandon the people you love is not worth sitting in. She said it quietly, without drama, like a conclusion she'd arrived at after a great deal of thought. I say that leadership which does not begin with I will come for you is not leadership. It is administration. I thought about Grevin, about paperwork, about processes. There's a difference, I agreed. I will challenge the charter, she said. I will use what I am to protect my people. I will stand in front of the arbitration council and I will make the case and I will do all of it. She paused. But I will do it as someone who knows what matters most. And I will not let anyone, any council, any tradition, any responsibility tell me that the throne comes before the people I love. She was quiet for a moment. Dale told me, she said, that you said I could hear him calling. Yes. He thought that was a very good reason. So did I. She looked at me, 3 silver eyes very still. It is a good reason, she said. It is the best reason, she paused. I want to tell you something, Kale Marin, about what you did. You don't have to. I am heir to the Moonfang pack seat, she said, with a quiet firmness that reminded me exactly what she was. I am the last of my line. When I make a declaration of obligation, it is not courtesy. It is pack seat law. She looked at me. You risked what you had, your position, your freedom, your career, for a child you did not know. For 63 children you did not know. You did it because it was right, and because you could, and because the alternative was becoming someone you didn't want to be. I didn't say anything. By the law of the Moonfang pack seat, which I am, she said, and by the bond obligation of my line, which has held for 600 years, you are owed. She paused. Whatever I can give, whenever you need it, for as long as I live. It was one of the most serious things anyone had ever said to me. I'll hold you to that, I said, because it seemed like the right response. She nodded, completely serious. I am counting on it, she said. The last relay movement happened 2 days later. 63 children, processed through the Heiress network, placed with host families and pack clan foster bonds across 7 safe territories. The Heiress record keepers documented every placement, names, biological markers, clan affiliations, foster placements. The kind of meticulous record-keeping that would allow families to find each other later, if the political situation changed. It was, Rel Heiress told me, the largest single safe relay movement the network had executed. She said it with the tone of someone making a mental note to update her operational planning documents. Dale watched the last group of children depart with the particular expression of a 9-year-old who has decided to feel all of his feelings quietly because the adults around him are busy. I sat with him for a while. Are they going to be okay? He asked. They're going to safe places, I said, with people who will take care of them. That's not the same thing as okay. No, I said, it isn't. He thought about that, but it's a start. Yes, it's a start. He was quiet for a moment. The girl I was telling the story to, then, she was 3, she didn't know where her parents were. She was placed with a Heiress host family. They have 2 other children. The foster record notes that she fell asleep holding the host mother's hand. He absorbed this. That's good. Yes. He looked at his hands. I kept thinking in the bay, I kept thinking if Sale doesn't come, I have to be the one who keeps them calm. The little ones especially, because someone has to. He paused. So I told stories. You did a good thing, I said. I was scared, he said, very matter-of-factly. The whole time, I was scared and I told stories anyway. That's what brave looks like, I said, not being scared. Scared and doing it anyway. He considered this, with the gravity that seemed to be his characteristic approach to information. My sister says something like that, he said. She says courage is just fear that decided to move. Your sister is right about a lot of things. Yes, he said, I know, a pause. She's also extremely annoying about it. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in 5 days. Dale looked at me with the beginnings of a smile. 2 weeks later, I filed my resignation from the Neutral Observer Corps. I filed it with a full account of what I'd done, the administrative access use, the documentation manipulation, the direct assistance to a party in an active territorial dispute. All of it documented precisely, because I was a consultant who documented things, and it seemed fitting. My supervisor called me within 4 hours of receiving the filing. Cale, he said, what were you thinking? I was thinking about an 11% mortality rate in 30 days, I said. A long pause. The children are safe, he said. 63 of them, yes. Another pause. The Moonfang Heiress documentation, he said slowly, if it's authenticated. It will be authenticated, I said. She's already in contact with the Council's legal division. The charter challenge will be filed within 6 weeks. A very long pause. This is going to be complicated, he said. Yes, I said. It usually is when things go right. The charter challenge took 14 months. I was not part of it officially. I had no standing. I'd resigned my core position. My consultant credentials were under review, and the legal situation around my use of administrative access was being evaluated by 3 different bodies with overlapping jurisdiction, and no clear agreement on which of them should be handling it. What I was unofficially present. Sale had been serious about the bond obligation. She'd been equally serious about a secondary interpretation of it that I hadn't fully anticipated, which was that pack seat bond obligation in the Moonfang tradition included the right of the bondholder to be present, useful, and employed in the service of the bondholder's work. Which is how I became, without entirely planning it, the xenobiological documentation consultant for the Moonfang pack seat legal challenge. It was not a paid position, initially. Sale's pack seat resources were limited. The Moonfang compound had been destroyed in the First Fleet campaign. Their financial accounts had been administratively frozen as part of the restructuring, and she was operating on Varash hospitality and the goodwill of the resistance network. What she did have was the documentation, the 600-year lineage records, the charter rights, the biological proof of continuous succession. What I had was 11 months of Observer Corps field documentation, filed in a system I still had read access to, that corroborated her account of the fleet's actions on Velthari Prime in detail that no fleet administrative filing had ever contradicted because they'd been filed by a neutral observer with legal standing, and no one had expected him to actually use them in an adversarial proceeding. My supervisor, in a communication I will always be grateful for, declined to revoke my read access during the review period. I don't know if he did it on purpose. I've always thought he might have. The Arbitration Council's ruling came on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because Dale had spent Monday evening teaching me a Velthari card game with rules that appeared to have been invented specifically to disadvantage anyone who hadn't grown up playing it, and he'd been very pleased with himself about it, and I was still mildly defeated when the notification came through. The ruling, the Reclamation Charter, was found to be in violation of the Interstellar Territorial Accord's provisions on continuous lineage succession. The Moonfang pack seat, represented by the last surviving heir Sale Moonfang, had legal standing to challenge the charter. The fleet's administrative restructuring campaign was to be suspended pending a full Accord review. Pending review, not permanently halted, not reversed. It would take years more, probably, to fully unwind. But suspended, the ships would stop, the detainee processing would stop, the camps would be subject to immediate humanitarian review. Pending review was enough. Sale read the ruling once. Then she put it down on the table in the small office we'd been working out of for 14 months, a borrowed room in the Varash compound, maps on every wall, documentation files stacked in every corner, and she was quiet for a moment. Dale, who had been sitting on the floor doing something with the card game he'd been reorganizing after beating me, looked up. "Well," he said. "Suspended pending review," Sale said. He absorbed this. "That's not everything." "No, but it's a start." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is a start." He nodded with his characteristic 9-year-old gravity. He was 10 now, actually. His birthday had been 3 months ago. He'd gotten taller in a way that seemed slightly unfair given that everyone around him had been under considerable stress. "Good," he said. He looked back at his cards. "Then we keep going. There's something I want to say about what I learned on Velthari Prime. In the 14 months I spent in a borrowed office with maps on every wall, and a 10-year-old teaching me card games with nonsensical rules. I learned that I want my brother back and I want to protect my people are not competing statements. I'd been taught, somewhere in my professional training, that personal bonds and public responsibility pull in opposite directions, that the mark of a true leader is the willingness to sacrifice the personal for the public good. Sale had taught me something different. The night before the ruling, when neither of us could sleep, she had said to me, Every great thing I have done in the last 14 months, I did because of Dale. Not despite him. Because of him. Because I know what it means to nearly lose someone you love. I know what it means to every family the fleet separated. Because I came for my brother, I know exactly why I am fighting for everyone else's. That is the thing about love that political theory never quite accounts for. It doesn't divide you, it teaches you what matters. And when you know what matters, when you've held a child's boot in the mud and made a decision about what kind of person you're going to be, you don't lose that knowledge. You carry it into every room, every proceeding, every document. It becomes the thing you build from. The Moonfang compound was rebuilt 18 months after the ruling. Not the original site, that had been too thoroughly destroyed, and Sale had made the decision, practically and symbolically, to build the new pack seat on land the Moonfang had held for 500 years, but never built on. A ridge overlooking the northern forest where the trees were old enough to have names in the clan's oral tradition. I helped with the documentation for the land survey. I was there for the foundation ceremony, which is a 3-day Moonfang ritual involving more singing than I'd anticipated, and a great deal of firelight, and what I can only describe as the specific gravity of a people who thought they were extinct discovering they weren't. Dale climbed the highest tree on the ridge during the first evening ceremony, which violated at least 4 of the ritual protocols, and Sale shouted at him in Moonfang with the particular blend of exasperation and helpless affection that I'd come to understand was their primary mode of sibling communication. He shouted back from the top of the tree that he could see the whole northern forest from up there, and it was worth it. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Tell me what you see." And he did from the top of the tree while the ceremony went on below. He described the forest in the firelight, the way the old trees looked like a sea going all the way to the horizon, the way the stars were coming out one by one in the east. I stood beside Sale and listened to her brother describe the world from a high place, and I thought about a 9-year-old in a containment bay, telling stories to a frightened 3-year-old, waiting for his sister to come. She had come. That was the whole story, really. Underneath all of it, underneath the charter challenge and the council ruling and the political machinery, and the 14 months of documentation, and the rebuilt compound and everything that came after. She had come for him. Everything else grew from that. Dale asked me, on the last night of the foundation ceremony, whether I was going to stay on Velthari Prime. I'd been thinking about it. My consultant credentials had been restored after the review concluded. The determination was that my actions, while technically outside core protocol, had served the Accord's humanitarian mandate, and that the documentation I'd produced had been fundamental to the Charter Challenge's success. My supervisor had put that last part in writing, which I suspected had required some creative interpretation on his part, and which I appreciated more than I'd ever told him. I could go back to the Corps. I could take another posting. 11 months of documented field work on Velthari Prime was considered strong credentials in the current climate. I don't know yet, I told Dale. He thought about this. He was 11 now, growing towards something that would eventually be quite tall, still talking constantly when nervous and considerably quieter when serious. Sale would say that's a non-answer, he said. Sale would be right. But I think, he said carefully, that sometimes not knowing is the honest answer, and honest answers are better than neat ones. I looked at him. When did you get wise? I asked. He shrugged. I have been watching my sister for 11 years. It rubs off. He looked up at the tree he'd climbed during the ceremony, now dark against the night sky. For what it's worth, he said, I think you should stay, not because Sale needs you. She doesn't need anyone, she's extremely capable and she would hate me for saying she did. He paused. But because you're good here, because you know what you're fighting for here. He paused again. And because you taught me that scared and doing it anyway is what brave looks like, and I think you should be here for what comes next." I was quiet for a moment. "What comes next?" I asked. "More work," he said simply. "The suspended ruling becomes a full reversal. The displaced clans come home. The children in the relay safe houses find their families or make new ones. The compounds get rebuilt." He looked at me. "All of that takes people who know what matters." He said it like it was obvious. Like he was 9 years old in a containment bay, looking at 62 other frightened children and saying, "Then we help them first." Some people are born knowing what matters. Some of them are 11 years old, and they teach it to you by climbing trees and telling stories and looking at the world from high places and describing what they see. I stayed on Velthari Prime. I'm still here. The pack seat is fully restored now. The Moonfang compound stands on the northern ridge, old trees all around it, firelight visible from the forest floor on ceremony nights. The Arbitration Council's full ruling came through 7 months ago. The reclamation charter is void. The fleet's campaign is formally ended. The reconstruction process is in its 2nd year. It's slow, harder than any of us expected in some ways, because rebuilding is always harder than it looks from the outside. Families who were separated by the camps, children who grew up in relay safe houses, the specific grief of returning to a place that was destroyed and having to decide what to rebuild and what to let go. Sale works, constantly, ferociously, with the same efficient precision she'd had when she was kneeling in the mud holding a boot. She is a very good pack seat heir. Not because she was born to it, she was, and it shows, but because she carries in everything she does the knowledge of what she almost lost. She told me once that the throne was never the point. She tells everyone that. It's becoming something of a known quote in the pack seat's public communications, which I find quietly extraordinary. The throne is not the point. The people are the point. The point is coming for them. The point is always coming for them. Dale is 13 now. He is, as predicted, extremely fast and an excellent climber and talks too much when nervous. He is also, increasingly, someone you want in the room when things are complicated, because he asks the questions that cut through the complicated parts to what actually matters, and he does it with the same matter-of-factness he'd used at 9 years old to say, "Then we help them first." He still beats me at cards consistently, with utter lack of mercy. I'm told this is a Moonfang family tradition. I've decided to accept it. Last week, Sale and I were walking the perimeter of the northern compound, habit now, for both of us. We do it most evenings, and she stopped at the point on the ridge where you can see the old forest all the way to the horizon. She stood there for a moment. "Do you know what I thought about," she said, "in those 4 days alone in the forest, after they took everyone, before I found you?" "Tell me." "I thought about whether I was the right person." She looked at the trees. "Whether someone else should be the heir, whether the Moonfang would be better served by someone who hadn't frozen in a canopy while her people were taken, whether the pack seat deserved a leader who'd done something braver than hide." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought about giving up," she said, "not dying. Not disappearing, just releasing the claim, saying I am not who you need, someone else, someone stronger, take this." "What stopped you?" I asked. She looked at me. "Dale was calling my name," she said. "That's all, it's the whole answer." She paused. "Not the lineage, not the pack seat, not 600 years of succession." She looked back at the trees. "My brother was calling my name and he needed me to be the person who came, so I had to be that person. And once I was that person," she stopped. "Once I came for him, I knew I could come for everyone else." She looked at the forest. "I did not become the pack seat heir and then learn to come for people," she said quietly. "I came for my brother and then became everything else." The firelight from the compound was warm behind us. The old trees stood in the dark ahead. Somewhere below us, in the compound, I could hear Dale's voice. He was telling a story to someone, the particular cadence of narrative that I'd come to recognize as his default register in social situations. The three-sworded hero saga apparently having evolved over the past 4 years into something considerably more epic in scope. Sael listened to his voice for a moment. Then she smiled, the full one, not the almost one, the real one that I had learned to recognize over 14 months and 2 years, and all the time in between. "Come on," she said. "He'll be insufferable if we miss the ending." We walked back toward the firelight. The northern forest was dark and old and very large behind us, full of the particular silence of a place that has been through something and is, slowly, finding its way back. I thought this is what a start looks like, from the inside. Then I thought Dale was right. We keep going. And